Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex and another top 10 list coming at you. This time, the top 10 best teams for the real World Boss Legend. Now, I know what you're wondering. What's the real World Boss Legend? Say that 5 times fast. What's the real World Boss Legend? Well, essentially, I was faced with this puzzle. One, do I do a video, five best teams, 10 best teams for Null, and then another video for Mephisto, Ultron? I didn't want to do that. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to do a video where I talk about 25 teams, the 5 best teams for each of these 5 bosses. And I'm like, that's really stupid. 25 teams is way too many. There's not even enough supports for that. 1. And 2, there's going to be massive overlap, because what I'm going to tell you is that you should use Jean and Thanos and Black Bolt for Null. And then I'm going to tell you the same shit for Mephisto and the same shit for Ultron. You can sort of get what I'm saying. So we decided to narrow it down. There really is only 2 best World Boss Legend if you are trying to grind out the most resources possible, and that is Gore and Jean. Unsurprisingly, the most recent and most difficult World Boss Legends are the best ones. They have better drops as well. Not a significant amount to some players, but to other players it is. Whereas Null and Mephisto and Ultron drop about 20 to 25 Carbonadium with about 7 to 10 additional Carbonadium for being the world boss of the day. You can get Phoenix and Gore to drop up to 30 Carbonadium plus an extra 10 on top of that. So I've regularly gotten 40 to 43. I think 43 is my all-time high Carbonadium per run. So if you do the math on that, you're going to get probably around 150 from Null and Gore, or Null and Mephisto and Ultron. But you can get 160, 175 even from Gore and Phoenix. Now, that's not a guarantee. Obviously, it's going to fluctuate, but the extra 10 Carbonadium a day, that's an extra 300 per month, right? It adds up over time. So that is why I'm focusing on these 2 bosses. It's also why, to be honest with you, I always try to re-roll for those bosses, and that's also why my gold is almost under 200 million, because I've spent like 70 million twice recently re-rolling these bosses. So in terms of difficulty, I would rank it Gore. Gore obviously is the second hardest, and then Phoenix is the hardest. So we're going to start with Gore to rank teams 10 through 6, and then we're going to go to Jean to rank teams 5 through 1. However, aside from rewards and aside from difficulty, these 2 bosses have another thing in common, and difficulty is sort of laced into this idea, and it's that you need a lot of survivability. Unlike the other bosses here, where you can face tank the majority of their moves, besides Ultron's, stone moves that instant kill you, the Infinity Stones, besides those moves there, you can face tank almost all of Mephisto's attacks, and you can face tank almost all of Null's attacks. Gore and Jean, on the other hand, can kill you with basic attacks that they do right at the beginning of the fight. So that is what is going to be sort of painting the picture for us today. We're going to be taking a look at the top 10 best teams for Gore and Jean, but we're going to be focusing on teams that are tanky. So there are obviously other options here. There are other characters that you can slate in, but I've designed 10 teams completely unique. There is no overlap. There is not a single support or leadership reused. This is very important. So you've got 10 completely unique teams, and they're going to obviously scale in terms of damage, but they all maintain a certain level of survivability, and I'll point out the ones that are a little bit lower in that regard. So starting off at number 10 is this Hulk team with Sif and America Chavez. Now, America Chavez, not the best support, obviously, for Hulk. Any support that increases damage to villains is fantastic here, but we've used up all of the other supports. But obviously, if you wanted to make this team stronger, you could sub out Chavez for someone like Valkyrie, etc. But Sif is a really important key here, because she's going to give Hulk 30% HP, and then she's also going to give Hulk the boss damage. Hulk, being one of the tankiest characters in the game, is no stranger to face tanking and just going through and getting the kill no matter what the boss throws at them. So that's number 10 here. Very well-built team centered around Hulk and centered around scaling his HP as high as possible. Team number 9 here, we have Namor, Beast, and Polaris. Beast, really good, in my opinion, a bit of an underrated lead. He gives 50% physical attack and then the crit damage. And then Polaris, of course, offering massive buffs on the passive. But you can always make this team stronger, and that's the sort of theme for the majority of the teams, by slotting Polaris in as the lead and then swapping Beast for someone else or another support like a Valkyrie, a Taskmaster, etc. However, If you're using the characters in restrictions where you can only use, let's say, for example, combat types, then that's where this team is even more flexible, because you go back to using Beast Lead, and then you just swap out Polaris for someone else, again, like Valkyrie, Taskmaster, Sif, etc. A bunch of different buffs are available there. But yeah, this team centers around Namor, very high damage character, good survivability, enough healing, very, very high HP and defenses. And with that VPAD skill, you can dodge a lot of Gore's attacks, position yourself well, and do a really good job. Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Man with Hulkbuster Lead and Taskmaster. Again, here you can sub out Hulkbuster if you don't like the 105% attack that he gives Iron Man, which I think is pretty spicy. But yeah, potentially a character like Riri Williams, Ironheart, which you can see here in the picture next to Thanos, would be a better leadership because she's going to combine a lot of attack, 50% attack, I believe, with the additional bonuses that she gives on her uniform passive. However, we're using her somewhere else. Iron Man doesn't need all that firepower. He has more than enough, especially at tier 4. Probably one of the least tanky characters on this list, but I believe he makes up for that with his tier 4 and his insanely high burst damage. And then Taskmaster's here just as a support. There aren't actually any teams, just fun fact, that utilize Taskmaster's, his Weapon Master support ability that applies specifically to Weapon Master allies. So you could absolutely tweak this list by adding in a character like that, for example, Moon Knight. But Moon Knight didn't make my cut of the 10 best team compositions, so that's why he's here with Iron Man. Coming in at number 7 is Blue Dragon Lead with Ancient One support and Mystique support. Now, Blue Dragon with the self-buffing lead is a fantastic option here for World Boss Legend. She has insane burst damage, but she absolutely needs to be tier 4. There's no wiggle room on that. Below tier 4 at just level 80 transcended, she's very weak, so I would not consider her a top 10 at all for World Boss Legend. But once she hits tier 4, she's absolutely top 10 potential, available for tons of different categories as well in terms of restrictions: human, hero, blast, female, all this sort of stuff. And then she scales very well with so many different supports, so you could really play Ring Around the Rosie with a dozen different supports, and they all work super well, basically because she has that self-buffing lead, which is so clutch. But Ancient One giving her resist, which is great versus Jean. It also gives her elemental damage to scale all of her lightning, and then it gives her ignore dodge, which is fantastic. And then of course Mystique here, generic support, just increasing her damage to villains, but a very underrated character. Also underrated is our number 6 pick before we round out the top 5 here, which is Shadow Shell. So Shadow Shell basically swapping places here with Blue Dragon for 7 and 6. Shadow Shell, in my opinion, way tankier than Blue Dragon, insanely tanky, and that is really what sets her apart. Doesn't have access to as many buffs, so whereas Blue Dragon has access to leadership, so you can use her with White Fox to really crank up her damage, Shadow Shell doesn't have that. So we're going with a more traditional lineup with both Wave lead support and then Shuri support, but just keep in mind, I know I've said it once in a video a while ago, you cannot use White Fox with Shadow Shell. It doesn't do anything. I mean, you get some of the White Fox buffs, but not the good ones. But yeah, Shadow Shell, absolutely fantastic DPS. Also really good at level 80 transcended before tier 4, so it's very, very flexible. And then also insanely defensive, right? Super tanky, super high defenses with the passive skill. The invisibility means that the bosses just skip a lot of their attacks because they are standing around not knowing where Shadow Shell is. She's just absolutely fantastic and an easy contender for the top 10 best DPSs in the top 10 best teams for World Boss Legend. Kicking off the top 5 here, we start with Thor using Valkyrie support and White Fox. This is a bit of an overloaded team, so you could absolutely move them around a little bit, but in this case, I think that Valkyrie works really well with Thor because they're both aliens, so they actually land on a lot of different requirements or restrictions together. White Fox, not so much, but you can obviously substitute out White Fox for someone else, and you'll still get a lot of productivity from Thor. And then the nice thing here with Thor, if you have his artifact, is that you can use him as a self-buffing lead. If you don't have his artifact, then this becomes a little bit trickier. You may have to bring in a more generic leadership like Beta Ray Bill or something like that. Not going to be as strong as this setup here, but it can still work. Thor, also like Iron Man, is a little bit less tanky than we would have liked. Certainly less tanky than Shadow Shell and some of the other characters we're going to talk about, but he does make up for that with a massive heal, and then has a lot of DPS, especially if you can surround him with some characters like this. At number 4, almost cracking the top 3 here, we have Sharon Rogers. Now, in terms of damage, she may be number 1 or number 2, but we do have other things to look at. But Sharon Rogers, absolutely fantastic for World Boss Legend. Huge, insane burst damage. True. Okay, World Boss just reset, no worries. Oh my god, I was talking about Sharon. Why are you giving me the orange ring, you goofballs? Anyways, Sharon Rogers, absolutely massive, just rips through content. We're pairing her here with Riri, so she has even more damage, right? We have this insane leadership, and we have the passive support. And then Ebony. Ebony's going to provide not only increased damage to Universals, which hits both Jean and Gore, but he's also going to give Sharon more defenses, because he's gonna lower the amount of damage that she takes, which is really good because although Sharon is a lot tankier now and she has a lot better healing now, you can still take a ton of damage, and because you still have to accumulate based on damage taken, it can get a little bit dicey at times. But Sharon absolutely nukes bosses and absolutely deserves to be on any top 10 list. Kicking off the top 3 here, Black Bolt, and you could probably argue that Black Bolt should be 4th and Sharon Rogers' team should be 3rd, but what I really like about Black Bolt is not only is he a self-buffing lead like Blue Dragon, but he also takes advantage and highlights a support character that basically gets 0 use otherwise, which is Medusa. So for a lot of you out there who transcended Medusa like a year or 2 years ago, you actually have use for her pairing with Black Bolt, because she gives Inhuman allies the same types of buffs that Taskmaster and Mystique give to all allies. So very, very useful there to make use of an otherwise very niche character. And then Proxima is just a generic support, in this case for villains. If you have the uniform for Black Bolt to turn him into a hero, then you'd have to swap out Proxima for someone else like Mystique or someone more generic. But yeah, Black Bolt is probably the 3rd character I would mention that has lower survivability, along with Iron Man and Thor. Certainly an issue for him, considering he has the damage to go up to very high stages. At that point, when you get to really high stages, like 50 plus of these World Boss Legends, that's when you're going to have to pay more attention to his survivability rather than his damage. But he does have the VPAD skill, which is very, very nice, and he does have insane damage. And that brings us to our runner-up, Thanos. So Thanos is interesting here because he combines essentially the best of both worlds. He has the tankiness and the defensive abilities of some of the best characters on this top 10 list, and then he also has insane burst damage after his rework. Now, to get the most out of him, I have surrounded him with 2 paywall uniforms. I do realize that this is probably one of the most expensive lineups you'll ever see in Marvel Future Fight, because we have a native tier 2, tier 4 with a seasonal uniform that costs 2,500 crystals. Woof. Then you have 2 tier 3s with both money costing seasonal uniforms that you exchange for tokens. So this is looking like a $50, $60 lineup just on the uniforms alone, regardless of the other costs of the other resources. So very, very expensive team. I acknowledge that. You could put him lower on the list based on the value, but in terms of the damage and in terms of the survivability, it's very hard to beat this 1-2 punch, right? If you have Squirrel Girl and she can apply that ability to Thanos, and then Morgan Le Fay as well, or I mean, you could sub out Morgan Le Fay. She's very, very good, but you can use other options here. Thanos just hits like an absolute truck. He's monstrously good. Iframe Ignore on his main skill makes it so easy to just hammer through bosses during their iframe skills and iframe stages and sort of in between phase changes. And then his defenses are bananas, right? He's just super tanky. Keeps on trucking no matter how many hits he gets. So very, very good. And also very high resistances, which is super important for Jean specifically because she deals fire damage. But of course, there can only be one. No surprises here, no shockers. Jean Grey with Green Goblin lead and Ghost Panther support. Easily the best team in the game for just absolutely blasting dudes and blasting World Boss Legends into dust. Even if you have a PvP build on Jean, did I say Sharon? Even if you have a PvP build on Jean, she's an absolute monster, and she just chews through content. She revives. She's so tanky, healing, reflect, everything under the sun. Iframe Ignore, accumulation. She's absolutely bonkers. She charges her tier 4 super fast, so you get that pop off every like 7 seconds of huge burst damage. Just easily the best in the game, and an absolutely wicked team that's not even that expensive outside of Jean. So if you take a look at the cost, Jean really just maxes out so much higher than anyone else, because unlike Thanos, who has a self-buffing lead, she can take advantage of all of Green Goblin's buffs, which is why I wanted to pair them together. And then you also have Ghost Panther. Some people might say that Ghost Panther is being wasted because I'm not using his lead, but I would sacrifice the 30% fire damage to get 40 all attack and 40 ignore dodge. That may not be, the best case scenario for every situation. You may want to go with Ghost Panther and then slide in a different support like a Morgan Le Fay instead of Green Goblin, but I still think this team is very flexible, and Jean absolutely dominates it in basically any, against any boss at any level. anytime, anywhere. It's literally, that's why she's number one, guys. That's why she's number one. She's too strong, too good, and way too tanky. So yeah, those are my teams. Those are my top 10 teams, 10 through 1 for all World Boss Legends. But frankly, for the ones that really matter, which are Gore and Jean Grey. So hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of my top 10 list using all different teams with no repeats. Thanks so much for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.